Greetings everyone, I am Dr. J, and welcome to my review of Gorogoa. This is part of a genre that I don't normally pay attention to, but due to the holidays, I had the opportunity to both learn about and play through this game. Since my mother doesn't play video games all that often, my father will sometimes try to pick out one that he thinks she'll like, which usually involves puzzle games with interesting art styles. Sadly, it didn't work out the way he hoped, but since it was a GOG copy, I got to run off with the installer and try it for myself. Even then, I might not have looked too far into it, as I was more than happy to have a fun time with Shadow Warrior 2, but when you end up with a nasty cold the day after Christmas, high-octane action isn't necessarily something you're interested in. Regardless, I can see why my mother didn't enjoy it all that much, because I spent about half an hour walking through the start of it with her, and while it was well crafted, it was also mind-bending in a similar fashion to Portal. For someone who doesn't play video games all that often, it can definitely be off-putting. But with my experience in the medium, I was able to get through much of the learning curve and got to have a decent amount of fun with it. Unfortunately, while I'm writing this script, I'm not sure how much of the game I really want to show for two main reasons. For one thing, working through the puzzles is something that might end up being ruined if you watch it happen rather than if you interact with it directly. Second, it's not all that long, with most Steam reviews reporting that it took about 1 to 3 hours to complete. They managed to do a lot with fairly basic mechanics, but because everything is hand-drawn, it was designed as a bite-sized experience rather than a typical 6-hour single-player game. Given what happens, it takes as long as it needs to, but to again make comparisons to Portal, it's a really interesting concept that does a lot of interesting stuff, and then feels like it's over almost as soon as it's begun. Despite jumping the gun by talking about the game length, I still think this is a game that's at least worth drawing attention to, hence this review's existence, so let's talk about what the gameplay is. For the most part, it relies on a visual narrative rather than dialogue, where you're helping a boy collect various items in order to appease some kind of dragon or other entity that has found itself at his home. At any given time, you'll have anywhere from 1 to 4 tiles being used for scenery, and need to interact with said scenes in order to help the boy proceed. On its own, a simple concept, but where things get interesting are with how much they allow you to do within that. Within an area, you can move around a little bit by zooming in or something in the scene, clicking arrows to move the perspective in a given direction, all in a manner which makes sense. Where things really get fun is when they start toying with perspective, because at certain points, you can, for lack of a better phrase, rip out some of the structure of a scene in order to create another one, as well as layer scenes over each other to accomplish different goals. This allows them to play around with the perspective a lot, leading you to go from one point to another without said movement necessarily making sense in a 3D space. It's a really clever use of the perspective that will have all of the artistic types salivating over the possibilities. To go along with that, the story is kept deceptively simple, in line with the hand-drawn animation, and to allow you to get a better grasp on the gameplay itself. And yet, when I think back on it, I can't help but wonder if there's any, for lack of a better phrase, deeper meaning put into the game by the developers. That could be projection on my part, as I got through high school by learning how to BS on lengthy essays, but given the type of people whom I suspect would make a game like this, it wouldn't surprise me if that were the case. There are a lot of interesting parallels and odd jumps in not just space, but maybe also time. Given what the ending looks like, I have a feeling there's some further meaning about, well, I daren't say too much in this review, but still, I think you get the point. It seems like there's something more lying underneath the surface, and I'm curious to see what other people thought of it. When it comes to the art style and presentation, I think it's overall well done. The art and music aren't really to my taste, but they work well within the framework that's been established, and I can appreciate them within that context. As for the game's difficulty, I wasn't able to complete it in an afternoon because I got stuck a couple of times, but that can in part be chalked up to me being dense rather than anything the game did wrong. Although, it's hard to know whether that's the case because there are times when the solution doesn't always seem obvious. Especially for moving layers on and off of a scene, there isn't always a good way to show the player what you're supposed to do, especially without dialogue or text. I did eventually figure it all out, and once that happened I could see what the developer had in mind for each area, though whether or not that was properly translated before then is something I can't say for certain. Especially given the fact that I'm not necessarily the target demographic as I don't play puzzle games all that often, it's hard to know how much I can or should complain. All I'll say is that if you're not into puzzle games, this probably won't be the one to convince you. Overall though, I'm glad that I got to hear about this game and try it for myself. It's a really interesting concept that I'm hoping is further developed, as I think it would be really cool to see it applied in other areas, such as something like a comic book. Play around with the size of the panels, play around with how much overlapping is allowed to take place, maybe allow brief 3D sections, and so on and so forth. There's a lot you can do with this idea. As for the game itself, it's really fascinating but difficult to recommend for people who aren't hardcore into puzzle games. Normally I'm not concerned with the price of a video game since that I have a large back catalog and can usually get what I want at a discount. In this case though, $15 for 1 to 3 hours is a little difficult to swallow. I know that in some places people fork over that amount for movie tickets, but I'm not one of those people, and given that I only just got out of college, that's a lot to ask for what is, to compare it to Portal again, a really cool idea and proof of concept that you want more from but don't really get. If that's something you're okay with, then you can find it on either Steam or GOG, and if not, then hopefully you enjoyed looking at something a little different than my usual forays into older titles. That's all I have for this video. Thank you all for watching. Please like and share this if you find it deserving, and subscribe to this channel for more reviews as well as other content posted on a pseudo-regular basis. It almost feels criminal making such a short video over the game, but I guess when you have a smaller game you don't necessarily need as much time for it. So I guess to make up for that, I'd better finish that RPG I keep talking about, and we'll see you all later.